the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I'm just going to make a little announcement here that Mark shared with me on his phone, just so we know that something might happen at 3:30. They are expecting the jury to give us their verdict at 3:30.
3:30.
So,
Wow. Fast.
yeah, that was fast. Okay. So, moving on to the consent agenda. Approve the Olmsted County Board meeting minutes from April 6th, 2021. Approve the final payment for County Project C-20-155. Approve the appointment to Chester Heights Sewer District Advisory Board. Approve team run, eat, drink races at Chester Woods Park. Hope they do that in the right order. Permission to apply for Minnesota Department of Human Services Office of Economic Opportunity Grant. Approve the gambling permit for Lake Zombro Forever Incorporated. Approve the Byron Olmsted Building Code Inspection Services Agreement. Approve the legislative funding request for CASA 44th and 14. And that was just the one that was just recently added as a walk-in. For those of you who may be viewing this on remotely, because you won't have seen that on the agenda that was provided earlier.
So moved.
Second.
Any questions or discussions? All those in favor of the consent agenda, say aye.
Aye.
Any
Aye.
opposed?
Oh, he's here.
Where is he?
Here? Oh.
It's a voice in the wilderness.
In here.
I forgot.
I'll let you guys get away with murder.
I forgot to have.
I was looking up.
I did that, but I forgot our volunteer interview.
Uh-oh.
We will be interviewing Alyssa Tuck today for the Public Health Services Advisory Board. I'm sorry, Alyssa, that I
Not too late.
by you.
Yep, no worries. I'm here.
Okay. And this is very informal. If you tell us your name and address and a little bit about yourself, and we'll ask questions and be impressed with your background. And then we will, at the end of our meeting, vote on it, and you will receive a notice about our vote.
Sure.
Okay.
All right. Well, thank you all so much for having me. This is an incredible opportunity. My name is Elisa Na. It's great to meet you all. And I'm really excited at the prospect of joining the Public Health Services Advisory Board. I'm currently serving as an administrative fellow at the Mayo Clinic. And so this idea of joining this board is exciting to me because when I think about my professional, my personal, as well as my educational backgrounds, there's a common thread that really connects and intertwines all three of them, and it's community work. I am a first-generation American, a second-generation college student, and my family came to the States in 1981 as a result of the Cambodian genocide. And so for me, that meant that naturally my upbringing really stressed the importance of giving back to communities and really paying it forward. My educational background, though, taught me that while it is important to give back to communities, it's also equally important to actually become a part of the community. And the way you do that is through deliberate efforts that directly focus on relationship building and fostering inspiration and motivation within community members. I received my bachelor's in public health and my master's in health administration. As far as the rest of my professional background goes, it's really shown me that these ideas of collectiveness, community, security, and solidarity are all truly connected with this idea of being a part of something greater than ourselves. And so I've had a myriad of experiences throughout my professional development, but I think that the most memorable and self-fulfilling ones were the ones that relied heavily on social interactions and relationships. So some project works that I've been involved with, ranging from completing international service projects to providing tutoring services through AmeriCorps to creating and providing STD educational resources to high-risk communities. I have always sought out opportunities to get involved with community initiatives that advocate for those who are disenfranchised, especially as it pertains to health and healthcare. Now, being a relatively new transplant in Rochester, I'm originally from Denver, Colorado. I really am eager to find a space in which I can continue to do this work. And with COVID combined with nationwide community trauma, violence, racism, I feel especially inclined to get involved now more than ever. And as a result of this social unrest, combined with the ramifications of COVID, I can confidently say that this is probably the most disconnected and isolated I have ever felt. And I'm sure many others feel similarly. And so, given the current circumstances, I haven't had very many opportunities to connect and engage with other like minded thinkers outside of Mayo Clinic. And so, I'm not only looking to join this community, but I'm also hoping to help continue building it.
Well, I'm really glad you moved here.
Yeah.
Any questions?
Yeah, Madam Chair, Alyssa, I noticed that you say you're an administrative fellow at Mayo Clinic. Does that mean you have a time-limited commitment to Mayo, or?
Well, the program is 2 years, but I like to tell individuals that while I, did obtain this position, I like to think that I actually obtained my career. I'm hoping and planning to stay with Mayo for the rest of this career journey.
Great, thank you. Just was curious if we needed to think to the future when you wouldn't be here, but nice to know that you're planning to stay on. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, you will hear from us soon. Thank you
Okay,
for
thank you so
volunteering.
much.
Thank you.
I'm gonna just step backwards for a minute. I always rush right into the call to order, and I did not call for if there was any public comment before we started. Is there anyone? No, and there's no one in the room. No, we won't be doing that. Thank you. Okay, so now we can move on to the regular agenda. The first one is to approve temporary abatement of penalty and interest on late property tax payments for the first half pay of 2021. Did you want, oh, I thought I saw Mark. There you are. Did you want to talk to us about that, Mark?
Good afternoon, Commissioner, Chair. Mark Krupski, Director of Property Records and Licensing. Last year at this time, we were embarking on a very uncertain economy, and we approved a temporary abatement of the 2020 property tax until July 15th, and then subsequently we extended that a couple of times to the end of the year. We're still not into full recovery, though things are looking much brighter today than they were a year ago, and we think it would be helpful to help businesses and persons struggling to meet the demands of payments and so forth due to financial hardships of COVID-19. So what's before you today is to extend the 21 property taxes first half payment until July 15th without penalty or interest.
I understand that you've talked to the other municipalities that we collect taxes for, the school district and the city, and they are also okay with this?
Yes, I probably heard from about a dozen different jurisdictions between school districts and cities and townships, and lion's share of them were all positive about it. We got one pushback that Hayfield School District wasn't as open to it, but and then the city of Rochester were just a little cautionary. It would not so much about doing this one, but what's our intention for post after July 15th, and Of course, I didn't have an answer for that at this time because we don't know, what's going to transpire over the next 3 months. But it did sound like they had some concerns about the cash flow if we were to consider a second one.
Okay. Are there any questions for Mr. Krupski?
Mr. Krebsky, we've
Motion to
heard
approve.
anecdotally that this has been positively received by the business community. Do you have any contacts that you would want to report on in that regard?
Well, the taxpayers have really appreciated it. What I look at in this is that it hasn't had a detrimental impact on the counties and the schools and the city's cash flow, yet it really is. It doesn't solve all the problems from our taxpayers, but anything we can do to help has really been received and been so appreciated by our business community.
Jim moved, I will second.
Moved and seconded. Any other questions or comments? All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion passes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. The Greater Zombro River Comprehensive Watershed Management Draft Plan. Who is going to present that for
That
us
is
today?
Skip
Skip, are you there?
or somebody.
Yep, good afternoon,
Caitlin.
Commissioners. This is Caitlin Brady, Water Resources
Caitlin,
Coordinator.
okay.
Figured it'd be
And
Caitlin.
Skip Langer will be joining me as well. I am going to go ahead and get my screen shared here.
Duly shared.
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much. Well, thank you very much, Commissioners, for having us here this afternoon. We wanted to bring to you an exciting update today. We have been working on our Greater Zombro One Watershed One Plan process for the last about 2.5 years. And we are getting very close to releasing that draft plan. So the intent of today's presentation is to bring you up to speed on our planning process, some of the priorities that came out of that process, what you might expect to see in the plan itself when it's finally out for public review, and then kind of our timeline going forward to actually approve the plan through the process and the required state review, and finally adopt it locally. So with that, I will turn it over to Skip.
Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Good to be here, Commissioners. So we thought we'd start out here with an overview of how our watersheds affect Olmsted County. Currently, as you know, we basically manage our water resources through our comprehensive water management plan that basically outlines the work that we're going to do right within Olmsted County. But back in 2011, the local government water roundtable convened in the state, and they started kicking off discussions to move to watershed-based planning instead of county boundary planning. And so with that, I guess, is where the development of the One Watershed, One Plan was born. The pilot projects were kicked off with 5 different locations within the state, and the Root River, which is one of the watersheds within Olmsted County, the Root River, the Zombro, and the Whitewater, kicked off in 2014. So the Root River was approved now. We're in our second biennium of funding. So we're receiving the watershed-based implementation funding, 1.4 million per year or per biennium. So 700,000 per year. That's shared between 5 different counties, soil and water conservation districts, and a watershed and a watershed district. And then our Zombro, as Caitlin had said, we're in the process of our planning effort here. And so we're moving toward our 60-day public notice within that effort, and look forward to hearing more back from the public, yourselves, and other agency folks about the planning effort to date. And I think looking forward, we probably in another 6 months, we're hoping to have approval from the Board of Water and Soil Resources Board, and able to move forward with bringing some funding into the Zombro as well. And then our third watershed, we know it as the Whitewater, is called the Mississippi River Winona La Crescent. We lovingly call it the Winlac watershed. And so that has just kind of kicked off its planning process now, and we've convened the policy committee for a couple of meetings, and are getting organized and rolling with that watershed as well.
Okay. So as we mentioned, today's focus is going to be on the Greater Zombro River Watershed. And the reason that we adopted the name the Greater Zombro is because it not only includes the Zombro watershed, but it also includes this little section of the Mississippi River, Lake Pepin, which are tributaries that flow directly into the Mississippi. And so we've been working on this planning effort, as I said, for about the last 2.5 years. We've been working with our partners across the region, including the SWCDs and counties of Rice, Goodhue, Wabasha, Olmsted, Dodge, and Steele. And in addition to that, we do have Bear Valley Watershed District, which is this outlined in yellow here, up in the kind of the northern regions of the watershed. And the city of Rochester also joined in our planning efforts. So we've been working through the planning process for quite some time here, and we are anxious to get this plan out for review. We did receive a planning grant, as Skip mentioned, through the Board of Water and Soil Resources for about $240,000. And Skip and I have been very intimately attached to this process, as we've been the day-to-day contacts overseeing the process and making sure that we're following all of Bowser's plan content requirements, as well as Goodhue SWCD, who served as the fiscal agent for our planning grant.
Madam Chair, Caitlin, what's the yellow area again? I'm sorry.
The yellow area is the Bear Valley Watershed District.
Bear Valley, okay, got it.
That's in Wabasha and Goodhue County.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
So my curiosity, Caitlin, is what river seems to be, it looks like there's a river on this map that starts in Goodhue, Minnesota, that flows over toward the Mississippi. Do you happen to know what river that is? I'm trying to picture that.
That part of the Zombro?
Way up at the top of the map.
I wish I had a map I could zoom in a little further.
Okay, just a curiosity question. I'm trying to look it up and not finding it, so thank you.
So along the top of the graphic that Caitlin has up would be the Mississippi River, Lake Pepin, and of course, as she said, that is a separate watershed that isn't part of the Zombro watershed, but it is part of our greater Zombro planning area. So that Mississippi River, Lake Pepin watershed, all of those sub-watersheds drain directly to the Mississippi in that northern portion of the greater Zombro area. Otherwise, the rest of the area to the south, it's all Zombro branches. So there's the south, the middle, and the north branch that all flow. And the pour point where it connects to the Mississippi would be at Kellogg, Minnesota.
Okay. So there are a number of different ways that we engage the public and different stakeholder groups throughout the planning process. And early in our plan development, we sent out our notification and our intent to plan together to formulate this watershed plan. And so each of the state agencies that have some sort of role in water management had an opportunity to respond to make sure that we're including their priorities as well as our own local priorities throughout the planning process. Another way that we engaged the public directly at the start of the planning process was to send out a resident survey. We sent that in both hard copy to over 1,000 residents within the entire watershed area, so across all counties, included in this plan. We had actually almost 300 responses, both hard copy and through an electronic survey of the same survey questions that we made available online. So we were very pleased with that. And the survey just asked them a number of questions about their priority concerns, like their concerns for the watershed and the water body that they relate most directly to. We planned in June 2019, we had a public kickoff meeting where we introduced our consultant and how the planning effort was going to go, and when we anticipate having a draft plan out for review. In early 2019, we also had a series of waterside chats located throughout the planning area. So we had one in Manorville, we had our second in Mazeppa, and a third up in Lake City. And as we worked our way across the watershed, it was interesting to hear both the similarities and differences in the different watershed priorities across the planning area. Following the waterside chats, we fell into 2020, and obviously there was a different set of challenges in 2020. And so unfortunately, we weren't able to proceed with kind of our next rounds of public input that we had anticipated throughout the planning process, but we were able to come up with some creative ideas, such as creating a GIS story map where we could try to engage the public through more electronic means. Also had a round of surveys that was inserted into that story map collection for folks to be able to provide feedback throughout the process.
So I think this next slide gives an example of one of our waterside chats meetings. This was a meeting held up in Mazeppa, and so at these meetings we were able to engage with the public. We provided presentations to them, similar to what we're doing here today, and then we asked them to help identify priorities within the watershed that were important to them, as well as to help us prioritize, resource concerns within the watershed. So the data that we collected from the surveys and the stakeholder engagement was what the consultant and the planning work group used then to identify the most pressing issues within the watershed, essentially affecting, the water quality and natural resources. So interestingly enough, and I think it's risen to the top in many conversations of recent, is that one of the key issues highlighted was the desire to address groundwater quality. So what we found was that it was rated equally across all of the groups. So not only in the public survey, but also those discussions rose to the top of the waterside chats. Our policy committee, made up of SWCD supervisors and county commissioners, had that as a top concern. Our planning work group, which is made up of staff, and then our technical advisory group, which is our Department of Natural Resources, Minnesota Pollution Control Agency, Board of Water, Soil Resources, Department of Health, also had that as a top priority, and so you kind of see that that aggregated to the top of all of those groups.
So as Skip mentioned, throughout the stakeholder engagement process, a number of these issues kept rising to the top. And in addition to the public feedback that we had, we also were able to utilize existing data, state agency feedback and priorities, and then our local plans and our local priorities that we've had over the course of having a county comprehensive water management plan. So we finally arrived at this list of issues to focus on throughout this 10-year scope of our plan. And the policy committee did recommend that we try to break the priorities into 3 issues. And that was mostly for being able to kind of establish a relative priority, because this is a 10-year scope and we know that we're not going to be able to do everything at once. And so the level 1 priorities ended up being the ones that were ranked top throughout our ranking process and through our public engagement process. The first one being addressing groundwater and drinking water contamination, excessive flooding throughout the watershed, our degraded surface water quality, and then accelerated erosion and sedimentation. And level 2 issues followed right behind that were identified as degraded soil health, landscape resiliency, and altered hydrology, and then threats to fish, wildlife, and habitat. The partnership anticipates spending the majority of our implementation funding to address these level 1 and level 2 issues, and that doesn't mean necessarily that we won't spend any time on the level 3 issues, which are threatened groundwater supply and reduced livability and recreation. But we do need to, like I said, prioritize these issues and try to spend our staff resources and the funding that we have on the issues that we think can make the biggest difference. And so many of the activities that we'll put on many of the practices that we'll put on the landscape, and many of the activities that we'll participate in throughout this planning effort will address, multiple issues across these 3 levels.
Madam Chair, Caitlin, I look at
Sure.
these, I'm assuming that you will then come up with a list of projects associated with these categories and assign dollar amounts to them. Do I understand that next step maybe?
Exactly.
Correct.
Yep. And so we'll show you just kind of a snippet of one of the tables that you'll see in the plan. But for each of these resource issues of concern, we establish a goal, and then we also establish what's called an implementation schedule. So we assign the activities and practices that we plan to implement on the ground, along with the dedicated amount of funding that we anticipate we'll spend in each of those categories.
Yeah. All right.
And just one last comment about the level 3 priorities. Again, these falling into the last level does not mean that they aren't, issues of concern that we should be spending time and energy on. But there are a number of other state agencies that are focused on these, and we do have ways built in throughout the planning process that we aim to address these. For one, on the reduced livability and recreation, we do have some funding anticipated to help promote the Zombro River Regional Water Trail, for one example. So we do aim to help steer some funding in that direction as well.
I would add one other comment too, is that as we work through the tier 1 and 2 resource concerns, that we also feel that that will help to, those improvements that are made in the tier 1 and 2 will also help to improve things like livability and recreation. It'll make the resource more attractive to folks, wanting to come and recreate on the Zombro. It'll improve the fishery and the habitat and things like that, and will draw folks, I think, to it more. So one does affect the other for sure.
One more, Madam Chair, is in all this, I know money is the linchpin, how much the legislature allocates. Is there a local share that is expected on these? Have you heard anything like that there will be a local share on any of these projects?
So I could address that. So with the One Watershed, One Plan project, I think one of the things that we had brought back to Bowser during the planning process within the pilot process is that if we're going to go through, there's a lot of different plans out here. In a way, we plan and plan, right? And we have through time. And so one thing that we had said to Bowser, the Board of Water and Soil Resources, is that if we put together these plans, then we would ask that you fund the plan. And so the answer to that is the watershed-based implementation funding. And there isn't necessarily match requirements. However, the way that cost share tends to work, at least through the Soil and Water Conservation District world, is that we do provide cost sharing to landowners. A lot of our work happens on private lands, and so we never really fund projects at 100%. The landowners and producers do have ownership in these projects and practices that get put on their properties, and I think that helps, for long-term maintenance and the function and value of the practice that's implemented. So there's not necessarily a requirement, but I think the positive that came out of this process is that they are providing dollars to, we've always asked for water resources funding, and I think this is a great answer that brings dollars into all of our counties to get projects put on the land where they can be effective at improving water quality and reducing erosion.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, so one of the requirements of the planning process is that maybe you've heard the terms or haven't, random acts of conservation or conservation triage, and that's sort of the notion that we're just putting these projects out in the landscape, kind of band-aids to problems and things that crop up across our county, and so with the one watershed, one planning process, we did have to develop measures to create prioritized, targeted, measurable plans. And so with that comes, gathering, kind of aggregating all of this data that we've collected, we've been monitoring for a lot of years. Many of the different agencies, Department of Natural Resources, Minnesota Pollution Control Agency, and even Olmsted County itself has done a wide variety of monitoring. And so we take all that information and we aggregate it together to come up with some priority areas across the watershed where we believe that targeting projects in these areas will be most effective in making water quality improvements long term. So the map that you see here does take and show some of these priority areas. And we look at both restoration, so areas that are degraded, and through implementation of certain types of projects can be rehabilitated. But we also have areas that maybe aren't, maybe have stream stretches that aren't impaired yet. And so we will use protection strategies in those areas. So what we don't want to do is if they're nearly impaired,
Skip, I think you need to be on the next slide.
We're still looking at level
Still
1, 2,
looking
and
at
3.
your prioritized resources of concern.
It should be switched. I see it switched over on Caitlin's.
Yeah. Do you see the map of the Zombro with the kind of the red, yellow, and green areas?
Just on our hard copy.
We're on level 1, 2, and 3.
Shoot.
Huh.
Well, we can.
We're seeing it on ours.
There you go.
Okay.
Voila.
Okay.
Get out the magic wand. So anyway, you see the different colors there, the green, the yellow, and the red. So the green are our top protection and restoration priority areas. The yellow would be our medium, and then the red would be, or excuse me, vice versa. The red are our top higher priority, and the green would be our lower priority. So you can see a lot of work is planned in the headwaters area of streams. When you think about treating water, slowing the flow type of practices, probably the most economical and efficient place to do that treatment is where you don't have enormous drainage areas we'll probably never see, projects like our Rochester flood control project. As amazing as that is, the economics of it today, probably would mean that projects like that are off the table. So anyway, there's also, you see all the red dots, and those red dots are a modeling exercise that was completed by Bar Engineering. They're the consultant that was hired for the Zombro. And what they did is they used, you guys have heard of LiDAR. We're looking at a new LiDAR flight. Well, this uses the old LiDAR information, and they create, looking at the terrain, they create a model that identifies areas where a large amount of sediment being delivered to the local water body. And so those are areas where we can make connections with landowners and producers to work together to get projects implemented on the landscape. Some of it is done, like I say, through modeling efforts. Some of it is up to local staff to use our professional judgment and make those connections that we have with our local constituents. And then some will be field verification, where we actually go to the field. We do that in-field assessment to make a determination about where projects fit the landscape and what type of project and things like that. And then this kind of gets translated into our implementation schedule. And like Killen said, we'll show you a little snippet of what that looks like in a couple slides here.
Okay, so now to transition to two more maps that we wanted to show you. These are our prioritization maps that target groundwater quality. So as I mentioned, groundwater quality was ranked as our highest priority concern within the watershed, and nearly all of the planning area, and as you know, much of southeastern Minnesota falls into the highest vulnerability classification due to our karst geology. So when we started mapping out our spatial locations, we were quickly realizing that kind of the entire watershed was lit up in red. And we were trying to really focus on how we can kind of nail down a little further our focus areas. So what we ended up doing was splitting our groundwater priorities into two different focuses. So this map focuses on kind of our deep groundwater or well priorities. So this is the areas of the county where we're actually
I think we need that map.
drawing
Yeah,
our drinking
Caitlin.
water.
We're still on the same map.
We're still on the same map.
Okay. Skip, are you seeing it?
Yeah, I see it.
It's moving for us. I'm not sure why it's not moving
need.
for you.
You guys got all the memories. You don't
heard
need to see
this
it.
song before, haven't we?
Yeah, I don't know why it's not changed.
Does
I think you've
that
moved
make it move for you?
actually to slide 9.
It should.
No, I'm the same.
The red one?
We should be on slide 8.
8, okay.
We see priority resources, sub-watershed areas, and priority project locations.
We still see the map.
We still
See slide 7.
Okay,
Yeah, I don't know why that is.
We have a printed version of measurable goals that nobody can read. At least these old eyes can't read it.
Okay, well, we should be on slide 8. This is the location of groundwater priorities for the deep groundwater well priority.
Not yet.
It's the map, the Zombro with the purple shading.
No, yeah,
Well, Skip and I must be in some hole over here in the 2122 building.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Where are they?
I think it's public health.
Well,
Does Lisa have a copy of
I do.
the PowerPoint?
Give me a moment here. I'll try and get that pulled up.
Hey, that's the Zombro.
That looks good.
It's looking good.
Like that?
Clear.
All right, just a moment.
So while we're waiting for that, I missed something really critical here. in terms of, is it our staff that has responsibility for all the projects within um, the Zombro, Greater Zombro River watershed versus other staff from other counties for the Root River and the Mississippi River watershed? How does that work?
The water projects all go back to each individual counties or water districts.
Yeah.
So.
Okay, so, but with Skip and Caitlin talking about, we've got Wabasha County and Goodhue County in here, so it'd be Wabasha County, Goodhue County staff.
Yep.
There's agreement on what the priorities are. Each county applies separately and does their project separately?
The watershed applies, then it comes back to each individual county. Then staff figures out if it crosses county lines to work together.
And is there collaboration across the county lines or sharing of resources?
Yeah.
In the meantime, you have to prioritize and use a limited amount of money. You know.
Sorry, Kennedy.
Yeah, so Commissioner Cascaden, the kind of the end result, once we have an approved watershed plan, will be this watershed-based implementation funding. And when we get those dollars into the partnership organization, we'll have a fiscal agent that currently is the Goodhue Soil and Water Conservation District. They're going to manage that 1.2 million for the Zombro for all of the group. And then what we'll do is we'll craft a work plan. And within that work plan, we will actually designate either specific projects or types of projects within the larger watershed area. And so those projects will take place in probably all of the counties, but that doesn't mean that, on an annual basis, every county is going to get X amount of dollars. It means that we will all get money to implement projects within our county. Some might get more, sometimes some might get less. But I think, overall it should balance, and we'll all get dollars to get water resources and soil erosion reduction projects, implemented, which will be excellent.
Thank you.
So Skip, we are on the slide that you were referencing now, so if you just want to let me know when I need to move forward.
That sounds good. Go ahead, Caitlin. Thank you, Lisa.
So just to back up again, so as I was saying, we were quickly realizing that the entire watershed was a priority, and we needed to nail down a little further. So we ended up developing these priorities into two focus areas. So the first one focuses on our deep groundwater, where we draw the majority of our drinking water. So we're looking at the deeper aquifers. So the shaded blue regions here are where we anticipate we'll be focusing our attention when we're doing projects related to protecting drinking water and the safety of our drinking water. So it might be that we are implementing an education campaign for private well owners, and we would focus in these areas. So then the second map focused more on our shallow groundwater priorities. As you know, we have karst geology in this area. We have a very strong surface water to groundwater connection, and a lot of areas that are very vulnerable. And so this shallow groundwater priority area takes a look at actions that will address contamination at the surface. So we're looking at more ecological health with these priorities. We're looking at the health of wetlands, the health of fens, and focus on areas that are important to our groundwater recharge. So you might see the darkest shade of pink is our highest priority. So you'll see in Olmsted County, you'll see the Decorah Edge highlighted here. That was one of our priorities that we wanted to make sure was established here, that we focused on the Decorah and made that a high priority area. We also have another area kind of to the north and east side of the watershed that's a darker shade of pink, and that's an area that we already know is seeing very high levels of nitrate above the federal drinking water standards. So you see, specifically in Olmsted, we have Farmington Township kind of highlighted there, and a lot of that data came from the targeted township testing that was done a number of years ago. So again, two different maps, but they help us focus in on where to implement specific projects to put them in, the highest priority areas. So you can move to the next slide, Lisa. Slide 10.
Yes,
Yep, we're there.
she did.
Yep, we're there.
Okay, excellent. So this is, again, this is a snippet of a table that you would see in the plan. It's going to be probably difficult for you to read, but part of the goal of this program and establishing this plan is to make it prioritized, targeted, and measurable. So this is an example of our measurable goals table. So for each of our priority issues, we have a number of goals that go along with that. And we have long-term goals, but then we also have goals where we want to hit those goals within our 10-year scope of this plan. So you can start to see how we've broken out those goals. And then as Skip said in the plan, we also break that out one step further and start attaching dollar figures to those in the implementation schedule. So you'll also see that in the plan. But one example here is one of our goals for addressing groundwater contamination over the next 10 years is to reduce loading at the surface through implementing management practices like specific field practices on the landscape. So you can see that we've established that as a goal, and then in the next table you would see the number of projects that we plan to implement. And the costs associated with implementing those projects, and then also the pollutant load reduction that we would anticipate seeing if we hit our target. So you can go to the next slide, Lisa.
She's there.
We have
So
it.
I'm getting a note here that we have bad network connectivity, and so are you guys able to hear us still?
Yes.
Yes. We can hear you, and we see slide 11.
Great.
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
We can hear you.
Yep, we can hear you, Skip.
Okay. All right. I'm having trouble hearing you guys. So essentially, I guess if we take a look at this slide number 11, this kind of focuses in on the implementation portion of the plan. And so these are actually, there'll be plan activities that are intended, to leverage the expertise of our partners and kind of provide us with a framework in order to achieve our plan goals. So with each activity within the implementation schedule that Caitlin just showed you a snippet of, basically those link back to one or more of our goals. And so the activities follow 4 categories of projects. And so they look at monitoring and studies, education, public involvement, regulation, administration, and of course, projects and practices. So with that, we anticipate 90% of the overall plan dollars to go toward implementing project and practices, and those will be field level practices where we're actually constructing practices, conservation practices on the land. It can also look like things like soil health practices like cover cropping, encouraging no-till or reduced till out in the landscape, nutrient management planning, and things like that. And a lot of times these are multi-beneficial projects which may not only affect surface water quality, but also groundwater quality, erosion, sedimentation, and flooding, which are all examples seen in this photo and are all higher level resource concerns within our plan. So the estimated watershed-based implementation funding for the Zombro is currently at $1.2 million every 2 years. the funding comes out on the biennium, so that's over $6 million over 10 years. These one watershed, one plans are a 10-year plan, but I think, we should look at it more broadly than that, in that I feel like these really are long-term plans with long-term goals. I think, most of our streams and rivers across southeast Minnesota are impaired. They exceed the water quality standards set by Pollution Control Agency, and I think a key goal is to work toward getting these lakes and these streams and rivers delisted. And so one other thing I should mention, along with this 1.2 million that we'll be getting through legislative action and through the Board of Water and Soil Resources into our coffers, is that we can use these dollars to leverage other funding. So in the river, we were able to leverage an additional $500,000 through a federal program called the Resource Conservation and Partnership Program. And so with the state funding, we were able to expand our original $850,000 that we received from Bowser into something that looked more like 1.3 million, and then expand the projects and practices implemented within that watershed. So there's going to be a lot of exciting opportunities forthcoming, and I think to get some dollars that are earmarked for water resources projects is going to be great for the watershed and all the counties and its citizens going forward. You can go to the next slide.
Go ahead to next slide there, Lisa. Yep. So just to wrap up here, I got two final slides. I wanted to show you a story map, an ArcGIS story map collection that my colleague Aaron Gamm and I developed to kind of help walk folks through our planning efforts and kind of where we are in the process. It shows some of our watershed issue concerns and the actions that we plan to take. And then it also has a fourth part where there's a public input survey for folks to go on and actually submit some of their ideas about where we should really focus our efforts as we start to develop our work plan and have funding available to us. So I will, there's a link directly here in the PowerPoint, but I will pop that in the chat too for anyone who wants to take a look at it and share that public input survey with their constituents or anyone else who may be interested in providing input. So it's a really good timing right now as well with the We Are Water initiative, being able to link the story map through a QR code that's available right there at the exhibit. So if anybody wants to provide feedback, they can do that in real time. So you can go ahead to the last slide here, Lisa. This just shows our timeline. Again, Skip and I mentioned that this plan will hopefully be out for 60-day review sometime next week. Our consultants wrapping up the final revisions, and then we hope to get that posted on our webpage and then submit that required 60-day review to the state review agencies. They will have 60 days to review, and then we'll be looking at kind of that June and July timeframe to be responding to the comments, revising the plan, and then establishing our public hearing, likely sometime in August. Once we've hosted that public hearing, the Board of Water and Soil Resources will have 90 days to complete their review. Probably over the course of that 90 days, a small group of us will be invited to present our plan to the Bowser subcommittee. So we'll do that hopefully in early fall 2021. Following that and following their approval of the plan, then we can adopt it locally. So we'll hope to bring this back to you sometime in early winter 2021 for adoption locally here, in which point this plan will join the route for two of the three watershed areas. So we'll make sure to extend the notice to you as well when this information is available on the webpage.
Right now, the money is the watershed wide, right? It's the total watershed, 1.2 million.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep, that's for the whole watershed area. Yep.
And is that one-time funding, or is that, how does that work?
Every
Continuous.
2 years.
I'm sorry, every 2 years?
Yep.
And we're guaranteed that amount? No.
Come on. Is that a serious question?
Well, sometimes it's built
Yeah.
into the base.
This stuff isn't.
Do we
Yeah.
have to apply
It's
every
based
2
on-
years based on our plan, or how does that work?
Yes, we do.
It is an allocation given through the Board of Water Soil Resources. But I think legislatively, they have to approve it.
And does this come out of the general fund, or is there some special allocation of a tax source that goes into this function? It just comes out of the
Yeah,
general
so
fund?
this is it's clean water funding.
Clean water funding.
So in the past, Bowser Board of Water and Soil Resources has had competitive funding pots for all types of different projects. And so the soil and water conservation districts and counties could apply for project funding, and we competed with each other. Well, what's happened now is they're converting that competitive funding to this watershed-based implementation funding. So it's more or less an allocation, but it still goes through a legislative approval to ensure that those dollars will be there. Right now, we're kind of assured the 1.2 million, but I mean, it could change, unfortunately. But I think right now we're in pretty good shape to receive those dollars.
Thank you. Thank you, Skip. Thank you, Caitlin. So the purpose of our of this presentation was to inform us of the status of the draft plan and review the timeline before it's adopted by local governing units. So we don't need to vote on anything, but just be informed. Thank you for that. Looks like you're going to have a very busy summer and fall.
Yeah.
Okay. So we're now moving on to the next part of our discussion, which is the nitrate assessment for new well construction. Ben, are you going to be presenting that to us?
Yes, ma'am, I am.
Okay.
All righty. I'm going to share my screen. I have a very brief PowerPoint presentation. Hopefully it works. We seem to be having some connection problems out here at the 2122 building. So we've been getting messages. I hope everything works out okay. I hope y'all can hear us downtown.
Yes, we can.
We can.
Obviously
Okay.
too far away.
Can y'all see my screen? Because I sure can't.
Yes, we can.
Yeah, we see it.
Okay. Well, I'll go ahead and get started. Madam Chair, honorable board members, Madam Administrator, I know it's been a long day for y'all, so we'll go ahead and get started right now. For the record, my name is Ben Griffith, and I'm your Olmsted County Planning Director. At the March 16th CAL meeting, a number of county staff listed on this first slide prepared a mountain of background material and presented a lengthy slide presentation regarding nitrate levels in drinking water for new well construction. This slide presentation is only about 11 slides, so we're not going to make y'all watch 40 something and whatever that was back in March. The CAL meeting was the culmination of over 2 years of work by county staff, most of whom are listed on this slide and attending virtually today, and reviews and recommendations from 2 county advisory boards Today, I'm going to provide a very brief summary of the nitrates issue, and afterwards, we're going to ask that the board make a decision in the form of a motion and resolution whether or not to revise the maximum allowable nitrate level for new drinking well construction. I hope the slide changed. Did it change?
Not yet.
Not yet.
Yes, dude.
It should be
Yes,
a
it
chart.
did. Yep.
Okay, there's a little bit of a delay. I'll just have to keep that in mind. Okay, Olmsted County is one of 8 which administers a state delegated well program, all located in southeast Minnesota due to our unique karst geology, which directly affects water. This chart also shows what their maximum nitrate levels are, as well as what nitrate levels require a signature by the homeowner of a homeowner notice and statement and acceptance form when water is tested at the pre-grout time under the assumption that the nitrate level will drop when the well is grouted. The amounts which require homeowner signatures is generally 3 to 5 part per million nitrates. And I'll talk about that a little bit later in the presentation. You'll also note that all allow a maximum of 10 parts per million nitrates, except Olmsted County, which is 1 part per million. Changing slides again. This is a nitrate concentration chart, and it's developed by the Minnesota Department of Health's Drinking Water Protection Unit, and it's used to assist state and local water quality planning efforts. You can see that at concentrations of less than 1 part per million in the aquifer or groundwater are primarily due to natural processes. Here in southern Minnesota, it should be closer to 0. When you get to the far north, where there's a lot of mining activity and different geology, it's a little bit higher. If I'm not mistaken, it's like average is closer to 3. But in this part of the state, it should be closer to 0 if the groundwater's not been contaminated. We'll talk about that a little more. In the 1 to 3 part per million range, nitrate concentrations are considered transitional, where the source of contamination may or may not represent human contributed nitrate nitrogen sources. In the 3 to 10 part per million range, nitrate concentrations are considered elevated and originate from human activities on the land surface. If nitrate concentrations are 10 parts per million or greater, they exceed both state and federal drinking water standards for community and public water supply systems. For Olmsted County, the Minnesota Department of Health has identified 29.1% of the county's wells falling into high nitrate risk range, 35.9% into a moderate range, and only 35% of the county's wells falling into a low risk range. Okay, I'm going to change slides again here. You should see a large map.
Yes.
This is, I'm sorry, is the map?
Yep, we're good.
Slide change?
We're good.
Yes.
Okay, I'm sorry to keep asking,
No,
but
it's
I
fine.
just want to make sure. This map is from the 2020 Minnesota Geological Survey and is commonly referred to by staff as the 50-foot cover map, since it typically means that the areas have less than 50 feet of unconsolidated material or sandstone shale over carbonate rock for 1 mile. In these shaded areas, it means that there is shallow cover over bedrock due to our karst geology, and that well drillers must need to drill down through the Prairie du Chien aquifer all the way down to the Jordan Sandstone aquifer or deeper aquifers in order to meet the allowable less than 1 part per million nitrate level. The pre-grout nitrate requirement of the county's well construction ordinance was created as it was the most efficient way to ensure access to safe drinking water. These 2 maps on the next slide provide a lot of information for professional staff, but I'm going to point out just a couple of highlights. The gray shaded areas are the Decorah shale layer, and the white areas are where the Decorah has eroded away. This Decorah shale protects the lower aquifers from contamination. It keeps contaminants like nitrates from reaching the older and deeper groundwater where most Olmsted County residents get their drinking water from. So where we see the white area is where the decora has eroded, and we can see these areas with increased nitrate levels in blue from 2014 and again on the right in 2019. If we flip back and forth between this slide and the previous slide, I hope it flipped back to the previous slide, you can almost see how these lay over each other and how it becomes very clear where we have nitrate issues in our groundwater. So I'm going to kind of flip back and forth, and you can kind of see where those areas all kind of lay over. I'm going to go to the next slide. This slide boils down a lot of public information into three main points that we would like to make. The first bullet point explains why we think 10 parts per million was established in the early 1950s as a maximum allowable level for nitrates, mainly to protect against blue baby syndrome. Other health effects were not considered when this 10 part per million limit was established, probably due to the sensitivity of available lab equipment at the time, but there are potential links to colorectal cancer, thyroid disease, and neural tube defects. With more sensitive lab equipment more readily available now, these and other diseases are currently being studied to help determine what the effects of low levels of nitrates over long periods of time may or may not have on our bodies. Last but not least, nitrates have been determined to be an indicator of other contaminants in our groundwater. A long list of herbicides, pesticides, heavy metals, and other substances are often present when nitrates are present. So if we think of nitrates as a canary in the coal mine for our drinking water, that's a really good indicator of what would be to come. There are approximately 6,000 private drinking wells in Olmsted County. The Minnesota Department of Health estimates that less than 20% of wells across the state are tested according to recommended frequencies. Using our own county data, we've seen approximately 35% of all private and community wells come through our water lab to be tested for nitrates in the last 5 years, largely due to the township testing program for the Minnesota Department of Agriculture. Of that, only 12% of all the wells in Olmsted County have had their wells tested every 3 years or more frequently. 32% of private wells in Olmsted County were constructed before 1958 or of an unknown construction time. This is why it is so critical to require tough standards for new well construction to ensure, as much as we're able to at the front end, that our residents have safe and clean drinking water available to them. Slide didn't change. There we go. It should be cost of treatment versus drilling deeper. Is that the slide y'all see, I hope?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. To carry over from the previous slide, this quote from the Environmental Working Group early last year hits the nail on the head. It is more effective to prevent nitrate contamination of drinking water in the first place. In other words, drilling deeper versus treatment. The alternatives of treatment systems are costly, but also suffer over the long term when homeowners neglect or put off routine maintenance or repairs, causing their treatment systems to not operate efficiently or effectively. After questions on costs from Public Health Services Advisory Board members, Chad Knudsen in our office put together some costs to give folks an idea of what these costs truly are when spread out over the time frame of a 30-year mortgage. Since we're talking about new well construction being primarily associated with new home construction and 30-year mortgages being the typical. Treatment and drilling costs when spread out over the 30-year life of a mortgage are very close. So if you were building a new home and had to choose between drilling a deeper well to ensure the drinking water for you and your family had the lowest level of nitrates, or to purchase a treatment system that would require regular maintenance, and if the cost of both of those options were almost the same, which would you choose? One of the potential unintended consequences of possibly changing the allowable nitrate levels would be that we think the well drillers may become more competitive in their quotes and drill to the new level instead of drilling to what we know to be a safe level right now. And so instead of affecting 3 to 5 new wells every year, there could be impacts to the potentially 40 to 50 wells that are drilled each year that could have been drilled to the 1 part per million level instead of a higher level. In summary, we'd like to identify a couple of findings. All the health risks are not fully understood, but we do know that there is still a cumulative health risk associated with low-level contaminated exposure over long periods of time. We know that vulnerable populations such as infants, children, and pregnant or nursing women are at the greatest risk. Private well owners, including those in Olmsted County, are consuming water that in some cases may not be of the highest quality. We know that the cost of treatment versus drilling deeper to avoid nitrates in the first place are almost the same, with drilling deeper being almost the fail-safe approach to providing safe drinking water or drinking water with safe nitrate levels. After all this research and discussion, it should be pointed out and emphasized that we are only talking about 3 to 5 wells per year that potentially would be affected by keeping the allowable nitrate level at less than 1 part per million. This slide is the advisory board recommendations, and the county staff provided information on nitrates and new well construction to the Environmental Commission and to the Public Health Services Advisory Board, and have been steadfast in our recommendation of leaving the maximum allowable nitrate level at less than 1 part per million for new well construction. The Environmental Commission recommended raising the nitrate levels to less than 3 parts per million and to allow the homeowner to sign off at 3 to 5 parts per million pre-grout, assuming the well water quality will be less than 3 parts per million in the completed well. The Public Health Service Advisory Board recommended no change to the current less than 1 part per million allowable nitrate level. And I would point out that both bodies recommended increased outreach and education throughout the county. I would hope that the county board would find it in the best interest of all county residents to make no change to the allowable nitrate level, especially during a period of increased public health awareness, as we are hopefully seeing the end of the current COVID public health emergency. And last but not least, this concludes our PowerPoint presentation, Madam Chair. And at this time, we'd be glad to answer any questions y'all may have. And you'll be glad to know that we have our subject matter experts available to answer questions. Now, you won't have to rely on me and my best efforts. Afterwards, we would ask that the county board consider the resolution provided by staff in the meeting packet that recommends no change to the allowable nitrate level in the county's well construction ordinance. And with that, I'll turn it over to the chair, and we'll welcome any questions and discussion the county board may have.
Commissioner Tyne?
Can we move back a couple slides?
Okay, hang on a second. Which one are you looking for, sir?
The one of cost of treatment versus drilling deeper.
Okay. I've got it on my screen. I hope you can see it on yours.
There it is. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Your second sentence underlined said, it is more effective to prevent nitrate contamination of drinking water in the first place. Can you explain to me how keeping a nitrate level at 1 actually prevents nitrates from entering an aquifer?
Well, the intent of the intent of the statement was drilling into a deeper aquifer rather than drilling to a shallower aquifer that potentially has higher nitrate levels and relying on a treatment system.
That's not preventing nitrate contamination. That's avoiding nitrate contamination. There's a huge difference. That statement is completely correct, and we're using it in the wrong side of it. So we've been on the wrong side of this equation since 1960, where we set a standard and then we do nothing to maintain that standard extraordinary. We did not prevent nitrate contamination by setting a standard. Preventing nitrate contamination means to actively prevent the human activity that causes nitrate contamination, as you outlined in the previous slides.
So if I understand you're looking at this as a duality, Commissioner Tyne, you see two things. One is the surface water, and one is the underground water, and you see a difference.
Well, there's a connection. So it's surface activity, not even necessarily surface water. So if we want to prevent nitrate contamination, and let's just say it's to the Jordan sandstone that we're talking about, because that's the only aquifer that we have nitrate contamination that we can legally drill to by state well code. The areas where we are outlining the Prairie-du-Chien is not being able to be used, generally can't be used because the Prairie-du-Chien is within 50 feet of ground surface within a 1 mile radius of the site. So we're not, by state well code, we can't use the Prairie-du-Chien in most of those areas. So what we're talking about is the Jordan sandstone not being able to be used because ground activity in those areas has contaminated that formation, the primary aquifer within Olmsted County. And for us to use that sentence and then say that that justifies keeping a nitrate level, that justifies not keeping a nitrate level and makes me wonder why we've been using that in the first place. We have been remiss in protecting our aquifers. I got many other statements to make, but that's the one that just caught me right in the crawl. So.
Any other questions?
I have struggled to assess the risk and assess the right public policy, and so I don't disagree with you. We've obviously been the opportunity to do prevention we haven't funded and we haven't done. Okay. The question then is, and I think that there's some general agreement that this needs to become a priority for us to do more. Okay. But as we look at this, there was an argument that was made at one point that we have a standard for when the well is drilled, but we don't go back and look at, we aren't doing the prevention, so you might drill to the deeper aquifer at the lower nitrate level. Well, we're not doing the prevention, so over time, your well may still get contaminated, and we're not assessing that in any. It's all voluntary whether or not we assess that. And the other argument was that we have the highest standard in the state, and why do we want to be an outlier?
Highest standard in the nation.
Highest standard in the nation. So why are we an outlier?
And if we changed it to 3 parts per million, we would still be the highest county standard in the nation.
And so it's not clear to me. I mean, if I have my public health hat on, I'd just do have the highest standards possible. But there's sort of a trade-off here. It's not clear it's really not clear to me that there was. It's still not clear to me why we decided that our standard has to be so much higher. And maybe Mr. Griffin, if you can speak to that, or if Mr. Melius can speak to why do we think it's reasonable for us to have a standard that is so such an outlier from the general standard? How are we really protecting anybody with that standard?
Well, Madam Chair and Commissioners, this is Mike Mealis. I'm Associate Director with Public Health. I'd be willing to describe at least my understanding historically of how just real quickly, how the 1 part per million came to be. And I think it was really an initial understanding of how not only nitrate itself, but its indicator value and of things that could get into the aquifers, that when a system is put in, a well is put in, now it goes into a drinking water system, is consumed by people. And so I believe at the time it was recognized that they wanted to avoid all human impacts of whatever might get into the well. And so that's why that 1 part per million was chosen. It was to make sure that the drinking water well, when it was constructed and completed, we had, to the degree possible, we were assured that it was naturally occurring groundwater that was not impacted by human activity. And so that's why we have 1 part per million. I would also say on the converse of the jurisdictions around us, They may have followed a variety of other things, but primarily we've seen at the local and state level using 10 parts per million simply because I don't think a standard has ever been established besides the 10 part per million, which in my opinion does not consider all of the issues and really only considers a very, very acute issue of blue baby syndrome. And you know, I think there is a lot that is unknown at this point around what impacts nitrate is telling us exist. And we are finding more and more information that nitrate really, as above background, is really an indicator that there are other pesticides in the water there, and of which those impacts we really don't know truly at this point.
But we don't know that with a 1% or a 3% standard. It does that doesn't that's those other contaminants. It's sort of a moot point. We just don't know. So if I look at this chart of the cost of treatment versus drilling, if we estimate the maintenance and water treatment costs over 30 years, but we don't know that that's going to have a water treatment cost over 30 years. We don't know that. That's an assumption. I mean, all we really know is what it will cost to drill now, and what we don't know what the maintenance costs over time will be. So this chart feels like it's not. I'm having trouble understanding why that is an equal comparison, because we don't know how many wells really are going to incur that cost.
I mean, I don't think that you would make an argument that if somebody had a well that was at 3 parts per million, that they would spend $110 to $415 a year to get it down to less than 1. I don't think that you would find a single house that would spend that kind of money without any evidence.
So let me, I've been through this, through the EC, through public health, a number of times, and listening to the discussion of 1 versus 10.
Well, 1 versus 3 is what we have.
No, 1 versus 3. And the presentations and the analysis that has been done so far is that the higher the nitrate level is in the well, the existence of other forms of pollution and so on exist. Those are then categorized into a higher health risk without necessarily a proven track. Okay, it's just the supposition that the more contaminants that are there at the higher nitrate level. Okay, so here's where we are. We haven't proven that. It's a suspicion, right? Higher nitrate levels, as Mike said, the highest at 10 seem to have a nexus with blue baby syndrome back in whatever. So the customer can sign off if it's over 1, right? In this county, can't they?
Only if the Department of our Public Health agrees that it'll end up below 1.
That it can't get to 1 or below.
Right. So if you're at 2 or 2.5 and they feel after you grout it, it should get below 1, they'll allow you to sign off. That's the only way they'll allow you to sign off.
Okay. So that from the other aspect, what we talk about here is the way it's structured. Now you look down the road of sale, right? Economically, you've now invested more. Maybe you didn't achieve the level, but when you go to sell, your house could be worth less because of the testing on the well. You may not even be able to sell it unless you drill deeper and prove, right? So that's the other economic ramification, right? Do I have that?
Can I just jump in there?
Yeah.
That's not accurate because it's a 1-day standard. The day they test the water, you have to get less than 1. You could sell that house 10 years from now and be at 9.9 and sell that house.
Because you don't have to have it tested again.
You do have to have it tested. For most sales, for lending purposes, most banks require you to test. But once they have that first test, Homestead County doesn't have any authority to require you to stay at that standard. So there are many wells that we have drilled and other well drillers have drilled that started out at less than 1 part per million and that are now more than 1 part per million in areas in northern Olmsted County.
So right now, Sheila, we are where we are. And Mark is right that dealing with it above ground, just like we do with waste, is the most prudent way to do it. And we're headed that way. Buffers and techniques to protect the decor edge and so on, but we got what we got. So I don't know where this is going to go. I've been through this a whole bunch of times. I'm not sure if we call the question where it goes. I'm not sure that Mark should not recuse himself because he's in the business. And does he have any, dog in the hunt? Because for him, if he drills deeper, he makes more money. So, it's a conundrum. It's a difficult thing to discuss. So do we believe or accept the dramatic increased public health risks for allowing a higher standard?
Do we know? We don't know.
We don't know. We don't know the exact health risks. The only thing we do know is that higher nitrate levels, there are more contaminants that appear, herbicides and things like that. So we know that. What we don't know is, does that add a great deal more risk to our health?
I would just qualify that a little bit. We know that there's a sliding scale, essentially, so that once you get above a certain level of nitrates, you're drinking water that's essentially surface water weeks ago instead of years ago, so you're more likely to carry it. I'd just like to point out that we set this standard in 1960, and we learned during our committee of the whole that that standard was set at 1 part per million because that was the limit at which we could test nitrates. If we were able to test nitrates at 0 parts per million, then our standard would have been that in 1960. And in that time, 61 years since then, every public health or planning department in the country has had the opportunity to change their standard, and even local counties like Dakota County has spent thousands of dollars to study the nitrate issue and declined to change their standard from 10 part per million. So this is not an unknown issue. We're an outlier in our decision. And I've said it in the past, if you live in the city of Rochester, right now you don't have drinking water above 1 part per million, but you very well could because the code allows you to have up to 10 parts per million. If you lived in Elgin, you do have nitrates above 5 parts per million. And it's legal.
Well, we just had a presentation from the Soil and Water Conservation Board about their efforts to stop surface contamination, the water above the ground, to lower that contamination, and that's what eventually gets into our drinking water.
What's your view?
So I see that we have to put the effort into getting the surface contamination out of our groundwater or out of our deep water because of our karst stuff. Now, I also heard, so just want to check this out if I heard right, that even if you get a well at 1 part, that within a few years it's going to be at 3 anyway.
It may, not automatically.
It's not automatic.
But I can tell you in Orinoco Township and Cascade Township, we have tested wells, because we do annual testing for homeowners that are interested in wells that came in at 0 part per million when we drilled them that are now above 1 part per million. So in theory, I wouldn't be able to drill a well to the Jordan Sandstone in those areas and expect to be less than 1 part per million because our land uses have contaminated our aquifers.
Madam Chair, just
Yes.
couple of procedural points before you call the question on this one. Commissioner Tyne, this won't be a surprise to you, but again, just because you're in the industry, I think it would be helpful before there is a vote that you simply explain briefly to the board why you believe that you don't have a conflict of interest on this issue. And then secondly, because Commissioner Beer is online, we're still technically operating under the emergency declaration rules, so there should be a roll call vote rather than just a voice vote. Thank you.
Well, I would just offer that I think it would be a conflict for me to keep it at 1 part per million because I would benefit financially. So I would recuse myself rather than vote to keep it at our standard because it benefits me to keep this low standard.
Mr. Kadan,
Mhm.
in a situation like this, is there ever is it ever appropriate for one board member to offer an opinion to the other about recusing themselves or not?
I think Commissioner Tynes stated a reason. Frankly, the board can collectively decide whether or not you feel that's a basis for a conflict of interest or not, and you can ask council here to weigh in on whether or not you feel that that's a valid basis.
By that statement, you mean ask you?
Or Mr. Walls, right?
Or Mr. Oh, there he is too.
He's socially distancing himself.
He's very distant.
He's very social
Would
distance.
either of you care to comment to us or advise us?
Well, I was just going to actually defer to the board. I mean, I think collectively, if you decide that you reach a decision as to whether or not you feel he has a conflict of interest, I would certainly defer to that.
Well, I'll offer, since I raised the question, there's always a difference when the board understands an issue and someone's role than when the public understands it. And while I really accept Commissioner Tynes' rationale that if we leave it at one part per whatever, his business does better. But I'm not sure that the general public won't see that he's in the business and therefore will see it as a conflict, and kind of out of concern for my colleague and concern for the board, I actually think the question that Commissioner Brown raised is that it may be more appropriate for Commissioner Tyne not to vote on this. That would be friendly observation, but not a motion at this point.
My opinion, if Mark wants to vote, he can vote. So we could all be construed to some conflict of interest if you want to get in our daily lives. Does Greg not vote on educational issues? He was in education. Does Mark, we said Mark just cannot vote on computer issues. He was in a computer business. You know,
I think I've established.
There's a little difference when you're directly engaged in the business.
I don't think so. But.
Well, that's fine. I'm just wanting to raise it as a question for us to consider because it's the board's reputation as well as Commissioner Tynes.
Right. Madam Chair. Madam Chair.
Yes?
First of all, I'd like to weigh in on this. And first of all, I think that Commissioner Tyne should be commended for bringing the issue to study at his risk of his own livelihood and informing people that this county is requiring people to spend a lot more money to build a house. We've always continually talked about other people saying, you know, they need to look at the codes. They need to look at this because it costs so much to build a house. And here we have the opposite going on. We're trying to reduce the cost of moving into the suburban areas. And Commissioner Tyne brought the issue to us. So in that sense, I think that it's commendable that somebody who knows about wells and well waters is bringing this to the county to say, I think that we can lower the cost of building and we can still be safe within reason. We could make the other argument, I'm going to switch topics here, but we could make the other argument that why not set it at 0.5 parts per million and really be safe? Public health is always a judgment of how far we can go to keep the public safe. Vaccinations. we could require everybody to have a vaccination. That would keep us safe, but it's not reasonable. And that's what we're trying to search for in this discussion of what we think is reasonable. And having the lowest standard in the nation without, I think, really good reason is not reasonable in this case. So I am ready to vote unless there's other discussions.
Well, I need to hear a motion that you're going to vote on.
I make a motion, we leave it as is, as staff recommendation.
I hear a second. No second. That motion.
I'll second that.
Okay, so the motion is that we don't change the standards. Any discussion or questions at this point?
Madam Chair, I guess I'd still like the clarification that at least before you actually vote the issue up or down as to whether the boards collectively determine whether or not Commissioner Tyne has a conflict of interest, because that has a bearing on his ability to vote on the motion.
So can we set aside this motion that we just made and?
You're going to have discussion, I guess, on the motion, and maybe as part of the discussion on the motion, you can address the conflict of interest issue before you vote.
So let us have a discussion on whether we think Commissioner Tyne should vote, not can, but should vote on this issue.
I'm fine with Mark voting on the issue.
I'm all right.
I'm okay.
I don't think this is, my opinion is, if it was me, I wouldn't vote on it, but I mean, you know, whatever, if he wants to vote on it, he can vote on it, but I wouldn't. You want to talk about, can I talk about why I seconded the motion?
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
I just, you know, it occurs to me if we're always making more things to lessen something. You know, we've had this standard for, I don't know, 40 or 50 years, and to lessen it seems to go against everything we do in public health. I mean, we're usually trying to make things better, and we're usually putting, you know, trying to protect people's health. The 1 part per million hasn't stopped any growth in Olmsted County that I've seen. I mean, I think people are still drilling wells and people are still building houses at a pretty good rate. So to lessen it, just, you know, to me, it probably doesn't make sense, but it's almost like saying, well, we're going to let smoking happen again. I mean, you know, we made a decision in the past, and to make that go backwards doesn't make sense to me. But that's what I think, and sometimes I'm not thinking clearly. So that's all I've got.
Okay. So we were still discussing in part of this whether or not Commissioner Tyne should vote on this issue.
Correct.
So I hear Commissioner Flynn say it's all right. Commissioner Wright says it's all right. Commissioner Brown says it's all right. I haven't heard from Commissioner Beer or Commissioner.
Beer said no.
Beer said it was all right.
No. Okay.
Who said no?
He said he wouldn't, but it's okay if.
He said it's okay.
Yes.
He recommends no.
Oh, is that what he did?
Yep.
I actually heard him say.
Yeah, I said I
that it's your
recommend
decision.
no, but yeah, it's his decision. I mean, I wouldn't do it. You know, I've stepped down from a few votes. I think you can remember in the past that would be. I don't think anywhere as near as tenuous as this, but you know, it's his decision.
Well, his decision is that he does not plan to step down from the vote.
I just don't see the conflict.
So we have.
But if the majority of boards wants me not to vote, I won't vote.
3, 4.
Madam Chair, I think I've raised the question. I'm not going to object to his vote. I've raised the question of the sensitivity. I thought it would be worthwhile discussing, and that's as much as I want to do.
Fair.
Okay.
So I get the sense then that there is not a majority of the board that finds that he has a conflict of interest. So for what that's worth, that suggests that he should be able to vote on the motion once it's put to you. So if that's helpful.
Well said.
All right, and it's all right with you too, Mr. Wells? Okay. All right then, so now we have a motion to not change the standard. It's been moved and seconded. So now, if we are done with questions and discussion, we'll take a vote, and it needs to be a roll call vote. Commissioner Flynn?
Aye.
Commissioner Cascaden?
Nay.
Commissioner Wright?
Nay.
Commissioner Brown?
This is keep
This
it at 1.
to keep it at 1.
Aye.
Aye to keep it at 1?
Yeah.
Okay, I vote, Commissioner Beer?
Aye.
And I vote
Tyne.
nay. Commissioner Tyne?
Nay.
And I vote nay as well.
Fails.
So that motion fails.
Madam Chair?
Yes?
I move to set the standard at 3 parts per million.
Okay, do I hear a second for that?
I'll second it.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded to set it to 3 parts per million. Any discussion or questions? All right, we'll do the same thing. Commissioner Flynn?
Nay.
Commissioner Cascaden?
Aye.
Commissioner Wright?
Aye.
Commissioner Brown?
Nay.
Commissioner Beer?
Nay.
Commissioner Tyne?
Aye.
And I vote aye as well. So it passes. 3 parts per
Is the new standard.
is the new standard.
Yep. It is what it is. That's all right.
Okay.
Process works.
Okay, can we just take a 5-minute break before we move on to the sign policy
Good idea.
and the COVID update? Okay. Decision item, Olmsted County Roadway Sign Policy Update. Nick, are you going to present that?
I will present that. Yeah, I'll
Okay.
screen here real quick. You know if you can see it.
You're good, Nick.
Okay, so to start out, I'm Nick Sanford, the traffic engineer for Public Works. I'll provide a brief summary of our roadway sign policy update. And most of you had seen it before. I think some of you have seen it more than once, so I'll keep it pretty brief. But the purpose of the policy is to establish uniformity and consistency in the application, installation, and maintenance of traffic signs on Olmsted County's roadway system. Our existing policy was adopted in February 2012. It includes the Federal Highway Administration minimum sign retroreflectivity requirements and how to maintain those requirements. And basically what retroreflectivity is how well light bounces off the sign and back to the driver, how visible the sign is basically. It's based on material and the life expectancy of the sign. The existing policy also outlines the life cycle of the sign materials and replacement and schedules for replacement as well. Our new policy updates will incorporate that existing policy. It'll also be more comprehensive by providing guidance on each type of traffic sign, which is regulatory, warning, and guide sign. It'll provide priority and timing for replacement for when signs get damaged and reach the end of life. It'll also add some language in there that will utilize the Minnesota Manual of Uniform Traffic Control Devices, or the MUTCD regulations and guidance. And like I said before, it includes regulatory, warning, and guide signs. Is there any delay in my slides?
No.
Maybe purpose roadway signs? Okay, good. So the main purpose of roadway signs for regulatory signs is to inform motorists of regulations such as speed limits and stops. For warning signs, it's to warn motorists of any impending dangers such as sharp curves and steep grades. And for guide signs, it's to help navigate the transportation system, to be clearly, marked with clearly marked routes and cross streets. So just some examples of regulatory signs: stops, your yields, your speeds. Some of them are required by law, and they will be the highest priority for replacement when damaged. Warning signs on our system, they're installed to call attention to unexpected conditions or adjacent to the roadway. The new policy will outline the warning signs that have not been found to be effective can be removed and will not be installed. In the policy, it outlines that any signs that are not included in the MUTCD will not be installed on the Olmsted County roadway system. Some examples of those non-effective warning signs are deer crossing, slippery when wet, and playground signs. So these would be the second highest priority for replacement when damaged. Guide signs, they help direct unfamiliar motorists along roadway system. Some examples are street name and directional route guidance, and they are the last priority for replacement when damaged. So just the main topic of conversation at the Physical Development Committee meetings have been the business service signs. And I'll just kind of outline what's included in the policy and what our recommendation is for business service signs. In the drafted policy, we wouldn't allow these types of signs within Olmsted County right-of-way, which is in line with our longstanding practice. We have currently 4 business service signs on our system right now. All of them are located on CONSAH 33, which is North Broadway. And it used to be Trunk Highway 63, which is why most of those signs are currently on that system right now. With the new policy, the new drafted policy that's in your packet, we intend to leave the signs in place, but remove them through attrition or if the business is no longer operating at that location. Each time we get a call for these signs, we mostly recommend that the signs are installed off of the right-of-way. We have no problem with signs that are off of the right-of-way, but within the right-of-way is where we have it drafted in our policy not to include them. So a few reasons for not installing: creates sign clutter, and sign clutter reduces the effectiveness of all signs. Just an example of one location just that comes to mind, that those existing business service signs are kind of located near anyway. County Road 124, 48th Street Northeast. If those types of signs, I guess, are allowed on our roadway system, there'd be about, just for businesses heading to the south there on Broadway, there'd be about more than 25 signs at just that one intersection, just to kind of get a visual of what it would look like. And as you can see in this picture, it's pretty cluttered. The most important sign is kind of hard to read, and it's, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but it's the hospital sign. It's a fairly important sign for someone getting to a hospital. It's kind of blends in with all the rest of the signs in there. Another reason is this: more signs on the right-of-way provide, they couldn't be obstacles within the road. Additional obstacle to mow around or for a motorist to hit. Having a program that includes these signs could potentially need additional staff and resources, additional efforts for the sign crew to install, maintain, and track, and could be additional resources to permit, implement, and manage a program. These signs may not be needed because businesses are easily found on mapping applications and GPS. Other local agencies, like cities in Olmsted County, do not allow these types of signs as well, so it would be consistent with other local agencies within Olmsted County. And then they also can create inequalities for businesses as well. These signs create advertising for businesses. They can present inequalities because not all of the businesses would be able to be eligible for one of these types of signs, kind of depending on the location. The current MnDOT guidelines for these types of signs don't allow businesses to have signs that are directly located on a MnDOT road. So we wouldn't allow any businesses that are located on a Olmsted County road to have these types of signs. So it kind of creates inequalities for businesses, and some of these businesses would get this advertising on our right of way, while other businesses would not be eligible for it. So, and that's kind of what I have for you, and I'd be happy to take any questions.
Okay.
Yeah,
Commissioner
your last statement that they're not allowed on MnDOT roads, there are signs like that on Highway 52. There are signs on state highways. I think you're in error on that.
Sure. I guess what I was trying to say there, and I didn't get across very well, is if a business is located directly on the route itself, a sign would not. They wouldn't be able to have a sign on the same route.
Would need one.
A sign that directs you off to either a county road or another. I think the ones I'm thinking of, you're mostly being directed off onto county roads to access a business that isn't visible from the highway.
Sure.
That is allowed, right? Okay.
That is allowed, depending on the county. Yes.
So I have a question. Those businesses that do have a little blue sign, they are charged a fee. Does that fee cover the costs of putting up the sign and mowing around it?
It does cover putting up the sign. It wouldn't cover mowing around it, per se.
I see. Okay, so, but we're not losing money on putting up those little blue signs.
No, so the 3 of the signs did not get charged just because they were there when it was a trunk highway 63. But one of them did get charged for, yes.
Can you repeat that?
I think he's saying the most recent sign that was put up that wasn't already in existing.
Wasn't grandfathered.
We did charge them the cost of the sign.
What can you tell us what the cost is?
We charge them roughly $700 per sign.
And how many signs are they allowed to put up?
One at both sides of the intersection. One at each side of the intersection, sorry.
So at most
So 2.
2. Okay.
2, yes.
Thank you. Commissioner Tyne?
I just want to take umbrage with a couple of things you said. One, when you talk about inequality, I think our present policy creates inequality in that businesses that are located on side streets off of county roads are not allowed the same access to these blue signs as businesses that are allowed or on state roads. An example of that would be when we exchanged Highway 63 for 75th Street, County Road 14. Immediately, Sargent's Nursery paid the MnDOT to put a directional sign to help their business. For all these years that they were off the county road, they were not allowed to buy the sign. So right now, those that are along 63, if they wanted to put a sign up like Apples R Us, it took a special dispensation for them to do it. They were at a competitive disadvantage compared to those businesses that were located off a state highway. And then the other things I want to bring up is when you did your categories of signs, you neglected to point out that we happily put up signs telling people that their wheelage tax paid for road improvements. So we will put up a sign telling them, thank you for your taxes. We will happily put up a sign saying, thank you for cleaning our ditches. And we will put up signs telling there's Essex Park. So we prioritize everything except trying to allow our local businesses an equal opportunity.
Well, a couple of points there. The blue signs promoting how your money was spent are not directing anybody anywhere. Right? So they're not telling people to turn. It's not an advance warning for something. It's just information like all kinds of things have. Number 2, along 75th Street, is the sergeant's thing in the right-of-way or outside the right-of-way?
in the right of way. We don't control
But
outside.
I didn't ask you. Nick, is it in the right of way on 75th?
MnDOT's right of way, correct.
And MnDOT allows that. That's their policy.
Yes, that's their policy.
But none of our jurisdictions, local jurisdictions, allow it. Correct?
Right, correct.
So is it acceptable for a business to put it outside the right of way on land that they may own or negotiate a position for?
Right. In fact, we encourage it outside the right of way. Yes.
And so is that really a detriment to the business that because it's now 15 feet further to the right, Mark? I mean, is that inhibits the business or doesn't?
No, but there's no guarantee that the landowner will provide that right.
That's right. There's no guarantee.
So there is a disadvantage.
So I have a question. Do we have a policy on how big a sign can be outside of the right of way? Can they be as big as the ones that are on the way to Wisconsin Dells? Are we encouraging that?
Those are billboards.
Unsightly. I don't want to create a bigger problem by saying you got to move the sign someplace else. The other question that I would have is, do these businesses support the tax base of Olmsted County? And don't they help pay for the roads and pay for the other things in transportation? And why would we want to say we don't want you to be successful? We don't want people to go there. We don't want you to know there. That part doesn't make sense to me. You would think that we would want them to be successful.
Let's be clear. In actuality, the customers pay for the road to get there. The customers pay for the access for his everything that comes in. The customer we pay for. So the business doesn't directly pay for the road.
No, but they do pay property taxes.
They put it into the product cost, and they recover that cost. Is that not true?
Yeah, that's true, but
That's
they also
true.
pay property taxes.
And that's also a cost of doing business that goes into their product cost.
Madam Chair, may I say something?
Sure.
It's a voice from above.
Moses.
From the ethereal.
Yes. Yes, please say something.
Okay. You know, when I was on the town board, we don't want stuff in the road right away. It's other than there's a lot of clutter going on. I mean, drive down 2nd Street. You want to see sign clutter, and those are signs that are telling you what to do. Add in some signs where you're going to have businesses, going to Beatles Bar because it's there. You're just adding more clutter. But the big deal, the number one big deal is when somebody piles into one of these signs, and they will, we get sued because we got something in the road right away. Might not happen for 50 years, but the more stuff you got in the road right away, trees, signs, we take trees down. We've had huge fights over willow trees and box elder trees that we take down out of the ditches because motorists pile into them, they get hurt, they sue the county, and the taxpayers pay. So putting these signs up, I am dead set against it, and I will make a motion that we don't do this, that we do the sign according to what Public Works has stated.
Mayor, second?
Second.
Okay, so now, the way this vote will work, if you vote no, you're rejecting this report and saying that it needs to be rewritten to include the blue signs. So, let me say that again. So it's been moved and seconded that we accept this report the way it is, which excludes the blue signs. So if you vote yay, that means that you are for this report, which does not include the blue signs. And if you vote nay, you are saying that you are not in favor of this report because maybe for whatever reason, but for certain that it doesn't include blue signs.
Correct.
Is that clear?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, do we have any discussion or questions? So, I'm going to write this down. I think we should do a roll call.
Madam Chair, just one point of discussion is that allowing signs would still be within some level of limitation and restriction, which has yet to be defined.
Right.
And so it isn't like a vote to reject this proposal is willy-nilly any kind of sign anywhere.
Right.
And I just think that needs to be stated for the record.
Well, in response to that, Sheila, the more signs you put up, if you put up one more sign, if you allow these blue signs to go up, whether you put up 1, 5, 50, or 500, one more, everything you put in the ditch is one more thing for somebody to hit and one more thing for us to get sued on. Be very cognizant of that, and it does happen.
Well, then, Madam Chair and Mr. Commissioner Beer, then we perhaps should remove all of this road built for you with your taxpayers' dollars, because we've now placed our taxpayers at risk. So I mean, we have a double standard here, I think. So
No, you don't.
Yes,
No, you don't.
100%.
No, you don't have a double standard. We've got signs that we put up. If you want to put up these business signs, you're going to have more signs than what we currently allow, and you're going to have lawsuits at some point. Might be many years from now, and you will have a lot more businesses wanting to put signs up.
Madam Chair, I'd suggest that Mr. Beer has made his point and that we're ready for a vote.
You calling
I
the
was
question?
rebutting Sheila. Mr. Wright, Commissioner Wright, I was rebutting what Sheila said.
You're right.
I wasn't going to make any more comments until Sheila.
Yeah, thank you.
I get a rebuttal.
I will correct my statement that both Commissioner Kiskaden and Beer has made their point.
Okay. So it's been moved and seconded to accept this report as it stands. I'm going to do a roll call vote for that. Commissioner Flynn?
Aye.
Commissioner Kiskaden?
Nay.
Commissioner Wright?
Nay.
Commissioner Tyne?
Nay.
Commissioner Brown?
Aye.
Commissioner Beer?
Aye.
And Commissioner Podolsky votes nay. So that motion has failed.
I'll make a motion to direct staff to come back with a reasonable policy that allows blue business signs.
Second.
Any question or discussion on that? Would you like to give some guidance on what reasonable means?
I would say a standard that mimics the Minnesota Department of Transportation.
Okay.
Would you please restate that?
I would like to see a policy that mimics or copies itself after the Minnesota Department of Transportation policy on business signs.
Thank you.
Any more discussion or question? Okay, so it has been moved and seconded that we instruct the Public Works Department to rewrite this policy, which will include acceptance of blue signs on the roadway. Commissioner Flynn?
Nay.
Commissioner Kiskaden?
Aye.
Commissioner Wright?
Aye.
Commissioner Brown?
Nay.
Commissioner Tyne?
Aye.
Commissioner Beer?
Nay.
Commissioner Podolsky votes aye. So that has passed. So the Public Works Department has been instructed by the board to rewrite the policy to include a reasonable definition of how blue signs can be incorporated. Okay. And now for our COVID update. Mr. Briggs.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the board. My name is Graham Briggs. I'm the Director of Public Health for the county. I'm going to attempt to share my screen here. I know we've had a little bit of technical difficulty today, so let me know if you're not able to see this.
Can you get a little closer to your microphone?
Yes, I'm also trying out a new laptop here too, and getting used to the microphone and the new camera and all that. So does this work a little bit better for everyone?
It works.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
We see the
All right.
chart.
Okay,
Your
yeah,
slide.
as long as you can see the slides, that's more important than me probably. So considering the time too, I'll try to run through these quickly today. After our update last time, I really wanted to focus on education and outreach and some of the work that we were doing in the community. I thought I'd go back to just a general update looking at our cases and our vaccine progress here this time. So this is looking at Minnesota's epidemiological curve. I wanted to note that Minnesota is one of a handful of states that have seen increasing rates of the B117 strain of COVID-19, which is commonly called the UK strain. Michigan is another state that's seen this, Florida, and there's a handful of others that have really seen this become the dominant strain locally. Minnesota is one of those states, and we believe that's partly responsible for this uptick that we've seen both in the cases, and if you look at the charts below the main one, we can see our hospitalizations have started to take a turn up as well here in Minnesota. We've seen a little increase in the deaths, but still the number of deaths overall is low, and we haven't seen an obvious turn up there as well. So something to keep an eye on here, but we are seeing some concerning trends that we may be turning up here in the state again. Looking specifically at Olmsted County, we haven't seen that obvious turn up in the hospitalizations and the cases the way that we have at the state level. You can see, looking at our epi curve here, that we have been increasing, but it's a slow increase. We've just been creeping up a little bit since we reached a low in the beginning of March. So we're watching that very closely to see if we start to accelerate, moving back up a curve again, or if we may have a little bit different dynamic here with transmission locally. Another sign I think that we're seeing here, in addition to this plateauing or a little bit of an increase and a state level increase, we have seen while the testing numbers have been fairly stable. That's what we see on this graph with the blue bars are the number of tests that we're doing every day, and the orange is our percent positive on a 7-day rolling average. We can see the testing has remained about the same, but our percent positive has started creeping back up, and it's almost at 9% again after getting down under 5 fairly recently, and back at the beginning of March here. So another thing that we're watching. This is a little bit busy, but it's our graph that's looking at both of our hospital bed use and our ICU bed use. So the orange line, for example, is our cumulative number of people that have been hospitalized. I wanted to draw attention to that for the commissioners today, that we are over 600 people now in Olmsted County that have been hospitalized due to COVID-19. And we're over 100 of our residents have now been admitted to the ICU at one point or another related to their infection. We can also see with the bars there, the purple, the overall number of people every day over time that have been using a bed in the hospital. The yellow is the number of people that have been using a bed in the ICU. And so we could see that peak that we saw near the end of November when we saw a surge here locally, and how that's gone down over time. But then just over the last couple of weeks here, how we've taken a little bit of a turn back up. We actually got down to a point that we had no one admitted to the ICU for about a week or so. And so another little bit of a concern here that we're starting to see increase in community transmission and the impacts associated with that. One thing we haven't seen, fortunately, is our deaths turn up. We've seen our deaths slow down dramatically since December, when we were counting about a death a day through most of the month. We saw that cut in half in January, down to 14 deaths, and Then, as you can see on the graph here, that down to 4, and then 1 each in March and April to this point. So I'd like to see that number continue to slow and get to 0 here and be done with having to count deaths related to the pandemic. You know, when we break down our cases, I wanted to point out we are seeing more and more impact of vaccine, I think, in our data. We're seeing our demographics changing now in our cases. So this is a graph or chart I've shown before. You can see that the gray bars are the cumulative percent of cases. Like if we look at travel, that green bar shows us cumulatively about 10% of our cases have been associated with travel. And then each of those shades of blue bars are looking back 2 weeks at a time in pieces to see what percentage of our cases have been associated, in this case, with travel recently. So we can see a little bit of an increase in travel with the dark blue bar over the last 2 weeks, and then prior to that, a little bit of variability. It becomes much more recognizable when we look at people living in congregate living settings, where cumulatively our percentage of cases is at about 8%. Of all of our cases have lived in long-term care settings. We can see how vaccination has pushed that down to it's around 1% now. And the cases that we are seeing when we investigate them are usually associated with end-of-life decisions and things like that, where people have not been vaccinated. So we can see a similar trend with healthcare.
Mr. Briggs?
Griffin, Mr. Briggs, I'm sorry. It's really difficult to hear you.
Okay, let me.
It's kind of rattly.
It's understand.
And you need to maybe slow down a little bit too, because it's hard to hear, and then you're speaking quickly.
He's trying to hurry to the end.
Any more input?
Criticism? Can you give me any other criticism?
Don't like that shirt.
Do you have
Oh geez, I made it over a year with the pandemic before we ran into terrible audio issues here. So maybe next time we'll be ready for me to come there live.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and maybe just getting even a microphone.
Really
It's
good
just
idea.
Really hard to make out what you're saying.
Well,
But
I think this might not look as good. I can't see the camera, but if I put my mouth right up to the microphone, can you hear me better?
No, it still rattles.
Still a bad microphone.
Just want to go to the last slide.
Right.
Let's go to the last slide.
Yeah, go to the last slide.
Go to the last slide.
Seriously. Back one. Go back to the.
I wanted to jump ahead to the last
I
slide.
just want to see the numbers. Keep going. The vaccine numbers. One more.
Oh, go to the last slide, except for the first 4 before that.
Yeah. In this case, I do have a question.
Okay.
The delay in reporting, Graham, is that, 3 days behind or 2 days actually?
Yeah. Yep, that's related to MDH is having trouble keeping up with the reporting going into the system. So that's the data that they've entered in. We also then see a lag with pharmacies or providers if they're taking more than a day or 2 as well. So that number we think is artificially low, the percentage. So we've probably already as a state vaccinated a couple percentage points higher than that overall if we were up to the minute.
Yeah.
Well, how many per day is the state averaging now?
For the state, I'd have to look at the live version. It's let me see here. I think it's a I actually have it right on my desktop here. I'll look it up for you.
Just take a guess. It's not that important.
It is. My guess is 350,736.
Thank you.
As of what time?
That'd be a good guess.
It looks like we've been averaging as a state about 360,000 a week over the last month or so.
Yeah. So basically, Commissioner Brown probably calculating his head when we're going to hit 80% of the people that are vaccinated.
Already done.
90%.
I folded it up on a piece of paper and have a date. I have a date.
That's right.
You want to get into the pool?
17th.
The time of the day.
That's
So
right.
basically what you're projecting is that at this rate, at this rate that we should reach that 80% vaccinated by May 1st, May 15th.
That's only
The end of May.
May, June, end of May.
Well, we're now getting the people who are most resistant to doing it, right? So it comes in come in slower for those like the 65 plus that we don't have, or the
I think
Hear you
Greg
now
is
at
talking.
all.
No, we can't hear you at all.
What is it? It's just not working.
It's not. You talk to IT.
Fascinating. We got to bring people in.
Exactly.
I'm sorry.
Are you just moving your lips and teasing us or what?
No lip syncing. This was pre-recorded last week. I'm actually in the Bahamas right now.
This is off his background thing.
He said he's actually
Background. I gotta learn how to do that.
Yeah, it's all lip sync. It's about the lip syncing.
Is he really?
Are you able to hear me now? Well
Kind of.
enough?
Yeah, kind of.
Yeah.
Okay.
You have a
Okay,
Bahamian accent, by the way.
I can hear you now.
It is 420.
That's steel drum music in the background.
Yeah, Jamaica this week.
We having fun yet?
So we are on track in relation to Commissioner Brown's question. We are on track, still on pace to offer vaccine to everyone that's interested in it by the middle of May. The Johnson & Johnson difficulties are going to slow that down a little bit, but if we look at Olmsted County here, we can see of our total population, we're at over 82,000 residents that have received a dose of vaccine. So that's 53% of the population has received a dose. Over 40% now has received 2 doses. If you look at the age breakdowns, that's where I'm hoping here, if we do see a surge related to B117, that we're protecting the most vulnerable. We're over 90% of our 65 plus population has received a shot. We're at 70% of the 50 to 64 age group has received a shot. And if I were to move things around, if this was a live screen, we can look at, well, this is our total population, just our 16 and over population. And we're
doing fine.
We're over about 65% of the people 16 and over in the county have received a shot. So we've got about 30,000 or so left that could get a shot. But as Commissioner Cascaden mentioned, that 10% left, with the over 65 group, either don't want a vaccine, have declined it, or for some reason have an access issue. So we're working very hard right now at making sure that we're providing both education and access to vaccine to everyone that's interested in it, and trying to do outreach. We're actually this week in Olmsted County, we're reaching saturation at this point. We've still got over 500 open slots for a clinic tomorrow that we haven't been able to fill.
Wow.
So we've now.
But we're number one in the state. It looks like, we've now passed Cook County and the percentage of our population that have been vaccinated. Yeah.
Yep, depending on how you break it down, whether it's 65 plus or 16 plus or the total population, we're quite a bit ahead of the state average. There's a couple counties based on how you break it down that, like on the 65 plus might be just a percentage point higher, or things like that. But most of those counties are small population counties as well that change a lot based on just one box of vaccine that shows up there. So. Overall, I think we're doing very well here with the access to vaccine that we've got. It's just a matter now if we put the bricks in the right spot, if we do see a surge here in the near future. So we're gonna continue to vaccinate as quickly as we can and ride through this surge. My hope here is that we do continue to see people interested in vaccine. Seeing that we've got 500 doses this week. We've been targeting 16 and 17-year-olds the last 2 weeks because we're seeing that group drive more and more transmission. And it looks like we've basically saturated that group. And as a community overall now, we're getting just this week now to the point that we've got more doses of vaccine than we have people that are able to show up so that we can inject them. And so That tells us we're getting to a point here where we're going to need to try that much harder in specific populations to try to get the rest of this population vaccinated.
All right.
It sounds like my microphone must be working a little bit better.
Yeah, a little better.
Yeah. So, and do I understand that public health is going to go into or bring the vaccine to some of the communities and then have their vaccination clinic right there where they live?
Yeah, we are doing that. We've gone out to or provided vaccine at churches and mosques now. We're working on getting vaccine right into one of the local neighborhoods here that's a little bit under vaccinated and at higher risk. Right here in Rochester, and really now starting to look at where we see pockets of cases, continue to pop up, or where we see if we're seeing a cluster of people over 65, being able to see where we see hesitancy out there in the community or an inability to get access to vaccine. And now moving away from trying to do 2 or 3 or 5,000 shots at a time to doing 100, but doing them right out in the field, right next to where people live, making it as easy as possible to obtain them. And I can cover this already. Here's the metrics again. We don't need to spend much time on this, but we are seeing that little bit of an uptick. We've got 10 people hospitalized right now. 4 of those are in the ICU, and we are increasing in our rate of transmission here a little bit still. I'm hopeful, though, that in comparison to the last surge that we saw, we are in a wholly different position now, having been given adequate time to vaccinate our most vulnerable and ensure that it's available for everyone, that it's in that most vulnerable population. But we might have some increased transmission here ahead of us still before we get the rest of the population vaccinated up. With that, I can take questions or just shut my microphone right off.
Do I have a motion? Thank you, Mr. Briggs.
Thank you, Frank.
Thank you. Okay, what I would like now is for us to take a vote on the volunteer who applied.
Move to approve second here, Alyssa Tech.
Second.
Discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Yep.
Looks like a wonderful person for you, Graham.
Yeah.
And board and committee reports. Start over here. Mr. Beer, do you have anything to tell us?
Nope.
No. I said no. You're laughing.
I'm laughing. Commissioner Brown?
And not much. We had Micah, which is always interesting because you get a fairly clear picture of what's going on in the Capitol. At this point in time, as Matt Mossman, the director, said, we're actually not playing nearly as much defense for some reason this year. We've gotten some of the priorities in legislation that look like they will continue. So we're, a little bit of defense, but not much. So it's really kind of surprising that we've managed to seem to, at least for this year, duck. You don't have to run for cover and look like it's going to cost us a ton of money. So hopefully it holds. You never know. An issue that is near and dear to my heart and business's heart is federal conformity. I don't understand why the House just can't do 100% like the Senate did, and why they should. I don't care how much you got from PPP. All that money went to pay employees that were not at work. It didn't go into their profit line. It didn't go into their pocket. It just kept their employees alive. So you say it's over 90% it covers. So what? You they'll hand a tax bill, fairly substantial tax bill, to somebody that got more because of their size. So I don't get that. Never will. Got all kinds of surplus extra money from the federal government. The loss in revenue is trivial when you add it up against that. So that's my political statement for today. So it's just disappointing, but at least on the positive side, we are managing to hold our own, which is in 18 years, 19, almost 90, this is the first time I can say that. I mean, we have always played defense. Matt, you agree with that? So, that's all I got.
Commissioner Tyne?
No.
Commissioner Wright?
No report.
Commissioner Cascada?
Well, like Commissioner Brown, I've been following some of the legislative things. I don't know if we've reported to you after the Graham Park Planning Committee met, and we met with the fellow who's doing the sponsorships. That seems to be going well, and we expect to close on a couple of those. We also met with the marketing firm that's doing the market analysis. And I think they've been doing a lot of interviews to talk with people about what they see the future uses of Graham Park can be. And we had the Amateur Sports Foundation attend the meeting and be hearing those discussions, but also talking to us about their new foundation, which is dedicated to creating sports facilities in the community. I met briefly with the farmers market at their board meeting, and they reported that they love the location. I asked them about their experience, and they loved the experience. I asked about volume of participants. They said was down compared to downtown, which I find hard to believe from the times I've been there, but sales were up. And they are looking to do some related activities during farmers markets that will bring in families and have some fun things like activities for kids and others that kind of expand the market day. They were concerned about the future of the county fair and if the county fair would be held this year. And I guess that's about that. I didn't have any information and suggested they just contact the county fair. They're trying to project how COVID's going to impact their uses out there. So I think that was that was the most significant things out of the Graham Park most recent meeting.
Commissioner Flynn?
Zoning, we had to do hundreds of pages of DNR updates last week, which
you liked.
It was just a lot of paper, wasted paper, is what it came down to on that. Then we had the Mississippi Watershed, that will be coming like the Zombro. We've been meeting on that, and that's all I have.
Okay.
Could I ask a quick question? The Zombro Watershed thing, there was a volunteer group. The One Watershed plan has replaced that volunteer group's effort, right? And so that is
Zombro Watershed Partnership dissolved,
yeah.
And then One Watershed, One Plan is formed.
Yeah.
Okay, right. And that really probably is stronger than I remember there being some concern.
It has we can't get access to the state Bowser funds unless we have a One Watershed, One Plan.
Okay. Thank you.
It really, point begins to simplify. I remember being at Micah one year with, there's 8 agencies that oversee water, and we're finally starting to coalesce into a more focused, responsible, and we can at least look at.
So I would like to close our meeting with a quote from the Talmud. Do not be daunted by the enormity of the world's grief. Do justly now. Love mercy now. Walk humbly now. You are not obligated to complete the work, but neither are you free to abandon it.
Nice.
Thank you.
Move to adjourn.